What's up, everybody? It's Kevin and Sergey, once again welcoming you back to the channel for another of our Antares lore series.
This week we're talking about the Ghar, maniacal pale space goblins encased in metal crab suits.
The Ghar Empire is situated within the Determinate, and it is bordering the Algren Prosperate, which is basically the only reason why anybody knows it exists in the first place. And it is in the northern tropics of Obereg.
And Empire is a bit of a misnomer with regards to the
true.
Ghar Empire. It's less of like an organized grouping of people and more of just a swath of destruction that the Ghar have cut across the galaxy. They don't really leave outposts on planets unless they're using it specifically to stage an attack on another planet. Mostly they just turn the planets into a goop made of distortion technology.
Yeah, it's just like a scorched earth tactic basically throughout the whole thing, because they're not interested in occupying territory. They're just literally interested in, fighting for said territory. And any planet that is being used as a jumping off point will have like fleets in orbit and like huge, organizations of like defensive satellites. But all of that is removed the moment that system is no longer valuable as that staging ground to continue waging war. And so ultimately, the only planet worth really anything is Garon Prime, the homeworld of the Ghar and where they get their name.
You won't find Garon Prime on any star maps, and that's because nobody actually knows where it is except for the Ghar. However, if you were to stumble across it, you would find exactly as lush and verdant of a planet as you would expect from the Ghar, which is to say, it's not lush and verdant at all, it's actually just a giant hunk of metal hanging in space.
Quite literally, it is from pole to pole, encrusted entirety in a facility that is like miles deep. And so what that means is that Garon Prime is just this gigantic planet-sized factory producing ammunition, weapons, and vehicles for the Ghar war machine. And the planet is so desolate that it doesn't really even have like a naturally produced atmosphere. There's no life on the surface, and the only thing that lives within like the labyrinthine tunnels of this giant building wide planet is just the Ghar themselves and like millions of slaves that they've captured from their ceaseless wars.
Now, Garon Prime is so desolate that the Ghar actually grow all of their own foods in giant vats. Mostly it's a kind of, I'm assuming, pretty gross algae that is probably super nutritious, but it's Ghar, so it's got to be nasty.
Pond scum.
Yeah, exactly. However, they also supplement their diet with a little bit of casual cannibalism. A lot of Ghar die, and they make use of them.
Green as people.
Exactly. Now, the algae that they grow also serves a dual purpose to enrich their atmosphere with breathable air. It's gross breathable air. It's described as greasy, which is not what you want. It's not what you want your air to taste like. But that is kind of pumped throughout Garon Prime all the way to the depths of this like kind of hive city. However, their pumps do break down sometimes, creating like essentially mass death in sections of their, I guess you could call it one massive city, right? It's a city.
It's like a hive city, but the worst part is that sometimes it's done on purpose to kind of like, oh, maybe we have grown a few too many Ghar that we need, and there's a lot of mouths to feed, so they just like flip a switch and like millions of people asphyxiate. It's terrible. And they total recall them. That's awful. The Ghar themselves are also grown in vats. They're totally clones, and that's been known for a long time. But the Algren and other members of the Determinate really are curious as to where the Ghar originally came from. Now, the Ghar themselves, they don't care. They're like, this matters not to my mission statement. But from those captured by the Algren and the ones that have undergone like biological testing, they can tell that the Ghar were at some point created by humans and from human stock with a little extra, probably dinosaur from the look at their feet. I'm just guessing. But they're, from everything that they know, they were most likely created in the First Age. The Ghar have been around for a very long time.
Exactly, and it's most likely that they were created for a specific purpose. They seem to be weaponized in some really interesting ways in that both their brains and their bodies are specifically molded for war. Their physical bodies, I call them goblins all the time. They're kind of like,
they look like goblins.
Yeah, they're like a desiccated human. They're spindly and weak. They have poor senses, these big saucer eyes that don't even see very well. But their internal body structure is set up so that it can accept these spinal implants that jack directly into battle suits. And their internal structure is made in a way that it accepts that much better than a normal human would. So it's kind of like they're genetically bred to be part of a separate machine.
Like Sergey said, this extends into like their mental capabilities too, because like the Ghar aren't stupid. They're just like very intelligent when it comes to the things that they are geared towards finding important. So if like it has anything to do with like tactics or like waging war or like factory management is my assumption, they're very good at it. But like if you give like there's no like Ghar ghost scene where they're like making a pottery together.
What a weird choice of art scene to choose.
I thought of artistry. Okay.
You're like, you could have been like, there's no Ghar painters, there's no Ghar sculptors, but no, there's just one no Ghar ghost scene.
Take my breath away.
We don't have the rights to that.
So from the fact that this is, you know, like their mental capabilities are geared towards this, and the fact that their physical bodies are literally like designed to be hooked into the Ghar war machine, they're just single-minded little goblins that just want to do nothing but kill humans.
Not much is actually known about Ghar's cultural society, but the fact that they're vat-grown and primarily a militaristic society leads people to believe that they are sort of raised in like vat communities that are already in military regiments, a lot like in Star Wars with the Clone Wars, but way grosser and more brutal, I guess.
They're all little pot-bellied Boba Fetts.
Yeah, exactly. Adorable little pot-bellied cannibalistic Boba Fetts.
This society that the Ghar has is based strictly on that military hierarchy, and it means that any Ghar that has like an active role in the military is worlds and away above any other Ghar, and that goes from the supreme commander at the top, high commanders underneath, and then even down to like actual battle troops. Like they're actually like, we're pretty cool, they have great lives. And you know, any Ghar that is considered like not as good or wouldn't be able to be a warrior has to have these like horrible menial jobs, either like driving the, you know, human slaves that they have on their factories, being technicians, or doing much more unsavory jobs. I can only imagine with their weird algae vats. There's got to be some pretty gross jobs on Ghar.
There's at least one guy whose whole job is just to skim the vat all day, every day.
But he gets all the free Soylent Green he can fit in his little grubby pockets. It's just like, oh,
that's true. He's a real corpulent Ghar. The only shared cultural value amongst the Ghar is that they value success above everything else, and they take a very black and white approach to that value. If you succeed in a battle, then you are promoted with rank. If you fail in a battle, it doesn't matter if you were brave, it doesn't matter if the odds were literally impossible, it doesn't matter if you almost won, you are a failure and the punishments are harsh.
Yeah, they're not nice to even their own people, because their overlords can like basically execute them in the streets as an example for everybody else. They can like banish them to do like horrible like slave labor on like irradiated sections of the city or whatever, and they can just be given a whole myriad of horrible tasks.
Mm-hmm. The coolest of which is that they can be sent to the gladiatorial pits, which is definitely going to be a terrain project that me and Kevin are going to do at some point. Cool. I really wonder what the Ghar Coliseum looks like.
Well, it talks about them basically fighting one another, which I can only imagine. Like we could get one of those like big helmets with like the holes in it and like a mag lash, and then it talks about like monstrosities and like horrible like mechanical like traps.
Yeah. We can give them a spear and an electro net, like a restorasis.
So awesome. It's like it gives an extra pin, but then the main for tabletop gamers, the one fate that you'll see the most often is a lot of them will be disgraced and sent to become outcasts, and they're basically just like stripped of all their equipment, so they're just like naked with their pot bellies and their like weird nodes and whatnot. They get like lugger guns, which are awful and run out of ammo really easily, and they're basically on Operation Meat Shield. They're not many battlefield roles they're filling in. the Ghar military is centered around their most infamous unit, the battle suit, which are organized into like small squads. And they call it a battle suit with crab claws, just like Sergey did. And it has 3 legs, so cool. But it's not really, it doesn't look like armor. It more or less resembles like a light vehicle, really.
Yeah.
And in the center is a GUI Ghar center in the form of the pilot that is like neurally hooked up into it. And these are kind of multi-purpose units in the sense that they have these cool weapons called scour cannons that allow them to fill in many battlefield roles. They can fire anti-vehicle beams, they can fire bombs, and like rapid-fire energy bolts, which is pretty sweet.
They also utilize large and small vehicles. Their larger vehicles bring their heavy weapons to bear and also carry their high commanders on their backs, which is a really cool image. They're like the Absolutely. Pale Riders of Death. And their smaller vehicles are kind of used for scouting and reconnaissance, and they're also armed with those scour cannons, so they can pack quite a punch too.
And then the last military unit that you would see, well, not really, I don't think they consider them military units, but it would just be these like unending waves of outcasts that have been, sent there as a punishment by their overlords. And these are kind of used as, well, they don't really want to do it, but it's like self-sacrificing like reconnaissance and kind of like we said, Operation Meat Shield, where they screen the advancing battle troops.
Like we said before, it's thought that the Ghar come from the First Age, and this is in large part due to their technology being so primitive. They don't use nanospore technology, their vehicles are made of just regular old metal, and they use like a really old style of neural connection to their battle suits that's only found on the most primitive and barbaric worlds in Antares space.
And then to have these vehicles and weapons that they use that are actual like heavy metallic vehicles, to power them, they need these incredibly powerful plasma generators. But the problem is, well, I guess they don't mind it, but the generators produce this extreme, not at all. They produce this extreme level of heat and dangerous radiation that bathes like the poor pilots in it, and that oftentimes kills them or like maims them for life. And the other aspect of that is that the technology in their weapons are so dangerous that I think it's called quantum gravity. So like the kind of weapons, which sounds brutal as hell. And what it does is it distorts nanospore so badly that the Ghar are still dangerous, because these fields that they leave behind in a battlefield render a planet basically uninhabitable by the advanced Intel societies, because none of their advanced technology will work.
This is the main reason why the Ghar, like we said before, the Ghar Empire isn't really an empire. They leave planets kind of warped and weird from all these weird gravity wells and like breaks in space-time rent across the entire surface of planets.
All this said, you can imagine that the Ghar don't really get along with many of their neighbors.
Really?
Yeah. They absolutely like skin crawl, like foot tapping, going crazy, like are disgusted by any pan-human. And when they encounter them, they immediately kind of plan and gear their empire towards, waging a ceaseless war. But with aliens, it's kind of weird, because they don't mind aliens. But if an alien were to attack the Ghar, they basically get added to the list and then are treated exactly as awful as they will with any other normal panhumans.
In my headcanon, Ghar are animal people. They're not fans of people, but like they like break for squirrels. You know what I mean?
Like they're all cat people.
He's scuttling along in his crab suit, and he like almost steps on a chipmunk. And he's like, oh, nope, carry along.
That would be awesome. Like that's like the only thing on Ghar YouTube is just cat videos that they share like over and over and over again.
What all of this boils down to is that the Ghar don't trade with anybody, they don't form alliances with anybody, and honestly, they really wouldn't even be noticed by most other Antaran races if they weren't just actively destroying anything they came into contact with. The only reason the larger Imtal races see their footprint is because they're constantly fighting with the Algorithm.
And that's the basic information about the Ghar Empire, a incredibly violent militaristic society composed of small space goblins that live inside War of the World tripod monsters and, wage a ceaseless war against all humankind.
Yep, all hailing from a Necromunda hive city.
Yeah, that's the best part. Yeah, they're all, oh yeah, what side note, like that would be so funny if we could sit down with Tim, because he loves the Ghar. It's like we could do a little supplement that was like, A, the Ghar Arena, because that would be so cool.
Yeah.
And then B, just like a Necromunda clone, but it's like Garamunda. It's just like you have these Ghar.
You could also would be mad if you wrote Garamunda.
Probably, but it would also be cool because you could have if you did like role playing games and used Antares as a setting, it would be really neat to play as like human slaves that have like escaped into like the hive city and are like
running for your lives through a Ghar city.
Yeah,
you're like hiding.
That'd be so cool.
You're like hiding like under the algae in a vat.
Yeah, well, and it's like, so even though Garon Prime is supposed to be like super secret and like no one knows where it is, at some point on our channel too, I've told you this a million times, I would love to model some kind of like interior fight. So it's like the Caves of Omega Verde, but like an actual like building. And now having been refreshed on this lore, oh my god, that'd be such a cool idea. You could have like Ghar and vats, like or like the giant algae tanks and stuff.
Yeah, we need some
really
Ghar vat terrain for sure.
Absolutely.
And now we've reached the lunatic zone of talking about pond scum and vats and all that. If you like this content, me too. if you love it too, go ahead and hit the like button, comment on this video to help us fight against the algorithm, and subscribe if you haven't already. We would love to have you ring the little bell and you'll get a notification every time we release a new video.
And if you want to help support our channel in a more direct way, we absolutely would love it if you would join our Patreon campaign. The pledges from our patrons are the lifeblood of our channel and help us to accomplish so much. And you can also get new swag in the form of TTW t-shirts and hoodies, and the link in the description below.
We appreciate all of you watching, and as always, we'll see you on the tabletop.